Psychotechnologies
Psychotechnologies Live.
Live. Welcome to a very special episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We've got a very special guest, Caveat Magister. He wrote this book that, if you've been watching the channel, Elliot's been showing every couple episodes. Very into. He's very excited about it. And so we decided to get the author on so that we could hang out with the living flesh that created the book. Maybe I should have called you Living Flesh.
The digital version, sure, why not?
The digital flesh.
The digital version of the living flesh of the mind that wrote the book.
Oh my God, that's so complicated. Already we're just going straight into the depths. So, Elliot, do you have a question for your favorite author to start with? Ask something random and exciting.
I feel like there needs to be context as well. Like, how did you get to where you got with creating psychomagical design?
Okay, well, so first of all, I want to emphasize, as I do all the time, that this is not something that I invented, not by a long shot. This book is a synthesis of a particular subculture in a time and place and how they used psychomagic in ways that I think are unique, therefore unprecedented and extraordinary, and hasn't been fully appreciated yet. But so it's important to separate my journey into psychomagical design and experience design from the discovery of psychomagic in and of itself. That's something that is common to many cultures, if not all cultures, and that I learned from lots of people, and goes on. So I want to make that very clear. So in terms of my personal entry into it, it's interesting. I did a series of classes for the Burning Man organization's educational program on psychomagical experience design, and I would bring in experienced designers whose work I respect, artists whose work I respect, and one of the questions I would always ask each one of them is, how did you get into this? How did you discover this? What was the first moment that you realized that something like this was even possible? And they all have different and really interesting answers, and it usually goes back to some point when they were pretty young and sort of going, wait a minute, there's got to be something else here. I feel like there's something that can happen, and then they encountered somebody else doing it and went, wait, what is that? And sort of stumbled towards it. But there's no clear and easy or obvious path towards it that they found. And it's the same way for me. I long had a sense from very early in life that there was some kind of experience that was possible, that seemed magical and that seemed like it could be achieved, but never really understood how. And I sort of was grasping for that in many ways. And looking back on a lot of my early art experiments, especially sort of social art experiments, it's clear that I was grasping for that. It's clear that I was trying to figure out how to do that, and just had no idea what it was that I was reaching for, or therefore how to step towards it. I think in particular, and this is something that I mentioned in the book, one of my first really successful experiences was when I was teaching a university class as a grad student, and I decided to make the class surreal and weird and bizarre, and not just as a stylistic choice, but make that embed that in the pedagogy. I was trying to get my students to honestly have no idea what I was looking for in terms of the right answer. They'd have no idea what the right answer even looked like in my class. And the purpose of that was indeed to confuse them, but it was to confuse them so that they would start actually thinking. I was trying to get them out of the mindset of this was a required course in basic composition. I was trying to get them out of the mindset of, well, I'm going to go in and tell the instructor what he wants to hear and put the minimum amount of effort in so that I can get the minimum grade I think I need. And I was trying to knock them out of that so that they'd actually start thinking, wait a minute, what's going on here? What is happening? And once they were in that mindset, it was much easier to actually teach, to have a real discussion about ideas, because they were thinking, because they were knocked out of that, trench of, okay, I'm going to put the minimum amount of effort I think I need in to get the minimum grade I think I need in. I'm just going to keep my head down.
Derail them from being stuck in the routines. And
right.
I'm catching a commitment to think outside the box. Well, there's no box. I don't even have to teach you to think outside the box because there's no box. You're lost. You're everywhere. Start writing things for me.
Yeah, I discovered that if I confused them enough, they would actually start to really think. They'd have to. What other choice did they have? And it worked. It worked beautifully. And in hindsight, I think that was the first really successful psychomagical experience that I designed intentionally, as opposed to sort of inadvertently stumbling upon. But the real change happened when I came to San Francisco in the early 2000s and discovered that there was this existent scene of artists and anti-artists and performers who were doing this as a matter of course. It was a culture, a subculture that dated back decades at that point, that was actively creating these kinds of experiences as a part of not just their artistic lives, but their daily lives. One of the ways I've described it is sort of it was the religion where everyone was a priest and everyone was designing rituals, but every ritual had to be unique. And it was extraordinary, and that it wasn't a unified scene. It didn't have any central text. It didn't have any central doctrine. Everyone was using different references and describing things in different ways. And so it was very much about practice. It was very much about praxis and what you do and who you had trained under and worked with and things like that, as opposed to a central set of doctrines or beliefs. And what I eventually tried to do after being involved in that scene for a while, and even occasionally having recognizable leadership roles, was to write a synthesis of it. I feel like the subculture still exists, but the scene no longer does. After about a period of about 30 years, the scene has become disparate again, gone underground. The pieces still exist, but it doesn't exist in the sort of cohesive way that it used to. The big energy has moved on to other things. And so I'm trying to preserve the knowledge that they had, synthesize it into something that is accessible and comprehensible, and also share not only my experiences in it, but some of the sort of locally legendary experiences that people had and created.
I'm kind of curious where that big energy might have moved to. Like, big energy doesn't just like delete. It's got big projects that it's following.
Well, yes and no. I mean, part of the issue was that San Francisco just got harder and harder for artists to live in. And so they started to disperse. And so the energy did disperse in that sense. Talking with someone like John Law, who was featured heavily in this book and is in many ways one of the local founders of this culture, he would tell me quite explicitly that things were possible to do in the 70s and to a lesser extent the 80s because you could work a part-time job and still pay rent and then be an artist the rest of the time. The economic consequences of getting off track now are so much more severe, and so you have a lot less time and energy that you can devote to this. You have a lot more fear about taking chances and experiments that might interfere with your livelihood, and often increasingly artists just can't make it around here anyway. So that's been one issue. Another issue, of course, is the pandemic. That made everything more difficult. It made in-person kinds of things much harder. It broke subcultures and cultures in a lot of ways, so that had an impact. But in many ways, I think where the energy went is away from what I would call psychomagical experience and psychomagical experience design, and into interactive and immersive theater. And this was not a sudden and abrupt change. It's not like you suddenly had people coming in saying, "No, let's do this instead." It was a fairly natural progression, because so psychomagical experience design is complicated and difficult and often unrepeatable in some ways. You are in some ways creating experiences that are in that moment of that moment, and hard to repeat, if not impossible. And so it's also very hard, therefore, to make a living doing this kind of thing. Theater, on the other hand, you can have a show every night. It's repeatable. You can do matinees, and it's more accessible. People understand what they're getting into in an easy way. And immersive and interactive theater, at first glance, seems to have a lot of the same components of psychomagical experience design. You are, creating a liminal space. You are, you have costumes. You have, people who are engaging in weird activities. The intention is often the same, but it's much more accessible. It's therefore much more and repeatable, and it's therefore much more monetizable. And quite understandably, a whole bunch of people wanted to make rent doing their art, and wanted to invite more of their friends, and have more people join in. And so I think there was a fairly natural shift that is actually not far from, it's an issue of success. You could have, it's easier to manage and produce those kinds of things, and they at first glance followed some of the same artistic impulses. And so I think a lot of the energy ended up going there.
Mm.
That's really interesting. I've never like thought of it, that history of that way, because like I do remember when I was younger, like seances and like these like magic stuff were kind of much more like part of the cultural zeitgeist, and they seem to have sort of disappeared. And I have been thinking of like psychotech as a way of like bringing that back or something, which I guess is what you're calling like the psychomagical experience.
Well, there's clearly an overlap to my mind between psychomagical experiences and the kinds of things that you're talking about. Seances and the like certainly can be psychomagical experiences, but I think of psychomagic as being a particular effect rather than a set of causes. Psychomagic is not what you do out in the world. It is if someone has it, it is the experience that someone is having in their head. If someone is having a psychomagical experience, then it's happening in the mind of the person experiencing it. And so it can come not from, doing X, Y, and Z out in the real world. The kind of techniques I'm talking about are designed to increase the likelihood that someone will have a particular kind of psychomagical experience, but it's not the thing itself. So people certainly do have psychomagical experiences in the wild, as it were. They can be walking on a hike and suddenly observe a particularly stunning moment in nature and have this experience of awe, or they can be going through a museum and see a conventional painting and something about that just speaks to them. The essence of psychomagic is that lightning that strikes, that fairy that comes to live in the garden, as opposed to the techniques are just what you do to increase the likelihood of it. But I think the point is exactly that. First of all, for whatever reason, the sort of contemporary practitioners of the sort of contemporary psychomagic have been very bad about training future generations. Somewhere in the 90s, 2000s, it seems like, at least in the San Francisco Bay Area scene, which is the one that I write about, transmission from one generation to another just tended to fail. The techniques stopped getting passed down to some extent. But also, like I was saying, the movement is from something that is difficult to do, complicated to set up, not easily repeatable, not easily monetizable, to things that make it much easier. You can live off of. It's much easier to be a working artist and live off of that. So yeah, I suspect there are a lot of cultural transitions that were happening in that same direction. I suspect that as the economy became more and more winner take all, it became harder and harder to be a weird artist and take risks and sort of practice your art in if it's hard to practice your art in lowbrow clubs if those clubs are disappearing. It's hard to practice your art in weird black box theater spaces if those spaces are disappearing, and it's harder and harder to do it in an urban scene if it's harder and harder to live in that urban scene. And I think that's something that was happening across geographically everywhere for the last couple of decades.
Are you having a psychomagical experience now?
Am I?
Yeah. Is there do they stay with you? Are you like right now in some sort of magical moment that I'm not seeing because I'm all the way over here?
No, we're just having a lovely conversation. The essence of the psychomagical experience. Let me go into my little on this for a moment. Is that, and I should say that I am absolutely piggybacking, if not outright, using Alejandro Jodorowsky's terminology and premises. I very, very much the term psychomagic, to my knowledge, is one that he invented, and the basic concept is one that he articulated. So again, I'm synthesizing the work of others. This is Jodorowsky's framework that I'm talking about here. But the essence of the idea is this: that our conscious selves are a very small part of the totality of who we are, of our psyches, if you will. That they are a very important part. They are the part that we have access to, that is easy and live in, but they're just a small part of who we are in totality. And you can take this on several levels. You can take it on a physical level, right? On a physical level, our hearts are beating and we don't generally have conscious access to that. Blood is flowing through our veins and it's not something we are aware of. Cells are dividing, neurons are firing, and all that is happening below the surface of our conscious awareness, but it's obviously really important. It impacts us in massive ways. You can look at the same thing psychologically. We all have frameworks that we put the world in, psychological frameworks that we are often unaware of, complexes and patterns that we are repeating, that we are not aware of, things happening in our unconscious, going on beneath the surface, that shape how we perceive the world, what we think we can do, what we think it is, what we think is possible. And we generally don't have any access to that at all. It's something that we experience, downstream. And then if you want to go there, you can talk about it in a spiritual way as well. We have souls, we have spirits, and they impact us and are important, but we don't have any access to that. So the key point here is that all of this stuff is happening below the surface, and yet it affects us in incredible ways. And Jodorowsky's central premise for psychomagic is that all too often, when we want to impact those things, we're trying to change ourselves or have a deeper experience or engage in something profound, we end up talking to our unconscious processes in the language of our conscious minds, right? We attempt to address our unconscious in the language of our consciousness. And that's a problem because our unconscious processes don't speak the language of our conscious selves. They don't speak reasonable discussion. They don't speak logical argument. They don't speak spreadsheet or, easy interface. That's gibberish to it. It doesn't care. Our unconscious selves, our deeper psyches, speak in the language of symbolism and poetry and action and magic. Those are the languages they speak. And so to attempt to engage in psychomagic is to attempt to speak to the unconscious of oneself in the language that it speaks and understands, and the effect then happens when our unconscious selves perk up and go, oh, this is interesting. Something's happening here. I can work with this. When we activate the appropriate archetypes, or get into somebody's complexes or projections and sort of interfere or take over, then our unconscious are like, oh, okay, let's see what's going on. Let's play with this. That's the essence of the psychomagical reaction. And that's what you're trying to generate. And so, while it is certainly possible that, like I say, one can have that experience in any context. I could be looking at the background behind Elliot and go, whoa, wait a minute, that speaks to me in some way. And I didn't even know that. And so I'm suddenly having this experience of awe. That in what we're trying to do thus far is not that. What we're trying to do thus far is have a conversation. We are explicitly talking in the languages of our conscious selves, and so thus far, nothing that we've done has been designed to try to elicit that kind of reaction.
I'm curious if there's do you have a guidance for like hypnosis? There's something of a susceptibility. Someone needs to be willing or ready to, or consenting to the process, at least relatively. I don't know if you talk to Darren Brown, he seems to be able to do some wacky stuff too, but is there something of how to open yourself up or be more susceptible to psychomagical experience? Right place, right time, right person? Like, how do you be the right person?
Well, this is one of the reasons why it is not as repeatable as, conventional art, because fairly often what you are trying to do is reach a person in their individuality in a way that is much harder to do in a generic sense. So I have actually focused a lot more, because I think this San Francisco art underground scene that I learned from was much more focused on sort of creating conditions where anyone can come in and access it, as opposed to trying to make people more susceptible to. But there are aspects of that. One of the chapters in my book is called "The Lazy Man's Guide to Starting a Cult," and it sort of is about just that. If if you want to make people susceptible to having a psychomagical experience, one of the things you can do is you can take them to a remote location away from, ordinary life, preferably one that has extreme natural beauty. You get them isolated, you give them some sort of challenge for survival or thriving where they have to overcome obstacles together. That tends to put people in the right mind frame. It's also, it works, and so it's important. But I also tend to think of it as, again, sort of the lazy attempt to do that. But part of the reason why cult leaders do that all the time is because, that's a thing that works. One of the things that I think is really unique, and importantly so, about the San Francisco scene, and this is again sort of what I'm talking about in the book, is its particular style and approach to psychomagic, which is exactly to lower those kinds of barriers. I don't think of it in the same way that I would think of susceptibility to hypnosis, which really varies to an extreme degree. Whereas I think psychomagic in its various forms is something that everybody experiences in some ways. It's culturally common, but most of the time, when you look at history and you look for this kind of thing, you find it in cultures in ways that are attached to specific spiritual practices, specific cultural religious practices. Religions have rituals, and those rituals are designed to create an effect of awe and communion. Okay, you have architecture that is designed for this. You have music that is designed for this. You have, in-person activities in which one engages in some way with a priest or a shaman or what have you, to create these kinds of effects. And that absolutely works and is extremely powerful, but it also requires that you accept the cultural preconditions to come in, right? You have to accept the terms of the religion in some way. Yes, okay, if you're going to have this experience, you have to believe such and such. You have to engage in these particular practices. So there are pretty strong, actually, barriers to admission to having those effects, and often that is the point. What the San Francisco art underground scene did for a period of about 30 years was to create a psychomagical scene in which there were no preconditions for entry. The idea is to create experiences where it doesn't matter what you believe or if you believe in anything. This is psychomagic that is equally accessible to atheists, to evangelicals, to agnostics, to conservatives, to progressives. You don't have to accept any preconditions in order to have these kinds of experiences. The experience itself is the thing. And I think that is a really important differentiation for the kind of psychomagic that emerged out of this scene. I don't think anybody had really done it that way, at least not to that extent, before. So I think the emphasis here is less on making people more susceptible, which is honestly, I think, an ethically dubious activity in a lot of cases. Whereas, as opposed to making the experiences more accessible to everyone.
I'm curious also on nearby, instead of on the designer's responsibility to make people more susceptible, what about the participants? Like, if I'm someone's told me they want to put me through some psychomagical experience, should I go in with certain you should be open, or should I go in without that? Should I go in with slightly sleep deprived, or should I go with how do I set myself up for the more psychomagical experience, or more likely to have a magical time?
Well, I mean, my first answer to this, and this is a bit frustrating, but again, it's sort of the point, is that I don't know you all that well, so I don't know what to tell you. But more generally, for the kind of psychomagical experiences that I'm talking about here, okay. So how do I make myself more participatory in psychomagic? You said, enroll my subconscious. Well, I'm the conscious one here. How do I jump in, invite that guy in with me? No, I get that. And I think part of what I am struggling with here in answering it is that I actually sort of resist that, both as an artist myself in this, and as someone who's been observing how I think this works best. Let me I
No
think
control. I'm not allowed to control the experience. I'm not allowed to set
Feel
myself
free to
up to.
reframe.
Yeah, tell me like that's the wrong question, and that I'm like full of bullshit.
I think there's something important here, because I think, first of all, it is entirely possible to psych oneself into having a minor experience of awe. That is a thing that we can do. You know, we set ourselves up for it. But I also think that doesn't that. To me, that's a very surface level effect, and it actually gets in the way of the deep kind of impact that we want to have. Let's use Burning Man for a moment as an example here. It hasn't come up yet, but Burning Man is actually the publisher of Turn Your Life into Art. And several of the examples come from this. And of course, Burning Man emerged out of the San Francisco psychomagical art underground. It came out of that scene. So there's a lot of connections there. But I've been very involved with the Burning Man organization at different levels. And one of the things that I really find unfortunate is the way in which people try to promote Burning Man as being a transformative experience. And I'm not saying that it's not, quite the contrary. It is very much a transformative experience for so many people. But I think the rhetoric of come to Burning Man and have a transformative experience, you're going to be transformed, come in. I think that actually is really damaging, because it sets the wrong level of expectations. Instead of engaging with what you're actually experiencing, you're looking at everything going, is this going to transform me? Is this going to transform me? And that's a terrible headspace for this kind of thing. That actually gets in the way. It also creates the impression that if you're not having a transformative experience, you're doing something wrong. And that kind of pressure is really not helpful. Burning Man is at its most impactful when you are engaged in it with a sense of, as one of its 10 principles says, immediacy. When you are having the experience you're having, when you come as you are and are being honest and open about what you're experiencing, to yourself at least, that's when you are in a better position to have the actual impact. Whereas trying to set yourself up for the transformative experience often, makes it harder to have the experience you want. I think it's similar with a lot of psychomagical experiences. Yes, if you you can be sleep deprived, and you can take substances, and you can set yourself up for that, but then that's the experience you're having is a sleep deprived high person, which okay, that can be fun, but it's actually not engaging with it's actually a way of not engaging with what is really happening in front of you. Whereas the most impactful psychomagic, in my experience, happens when you come as you are. I mean, yes, you should go through the experience. You should be open enough that you can do that. And if you don't want to do that, then you should probably be doing something else. But it's
don't fake it.
Yeah, this sense of I'm going to psych myself into it is actually, I think, counterproductive. I'm a big believer in come as you are for this kind of thing. Show up as the person you are, having the experience you're having, and then see what happens next. That makes it more apt for lightning to strike in that way.
Actually, go ahead, Daniel.
I think a lot of this stuff happens very surprise or from your blind spots. And so if you're coming in trying to do a thing, then you're just going to do the thing that you're doing. But what you really want is the thing that you're not doing.
Yeah.
And you can't really get that without an outside affecting you.
Your creative psyche is not interested in going through the motions. It's as with the class that I was teaching back when, it's the going through the motions part that actually silences the part of you that is capable of having this experience. And that can be a way of partying too, frankly. I mean, going out, having an amazing time can actually be still a way of going through the motions, as opposed to being open and letting yourself have the experience that is actually in front of you.
I realize this has brought up a memory for me of a time when this kind of happened. I was at a small festival. It was a weekend long, and it had flooded out, and there was one indoor hall. And so a bunch of people had moved to the indoor hall, and I was it was 11 o'clock at night. I was trying to get some sleep, and there was this crowd of about 15 people sitting around trying to have their whatever conversation. And there was this one guy who knew me as a sort of experience designer type person, big meditator, sort of I do things from time to time. Anyway, he decides to tell everyone, let's have an experience. Let's do a thing. Not very specific. And he calls me over and I'm like, here I am trying to get sleep. And I'm like, it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm so sick of it's been a long day. Anyway, I sit down in the group and he's like, come on, everyone, let's do the thing. Let's have the experience. And I just do nothing. I just sit there and for like 10 seconds and like pay attention to everyone. And just like that much break in whatever conversation they were doing. And like 7 people said, I need the toilet. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to do this. And then they all left. And then I went to sleep. It was great for me. Very sad for my good friend who was trying to get everyone to have this experience and try to like create, like you couldn't box it. You couldn't force it on people. They were not up for it. And I suspect it's because he tried to sculpt it a little bit too hard.
Yeah. Our deeper psyches react when they see something that they actually want to engage in and are interested in. They don't come on command. They don't, I've been able to do exactly one experience. I call this Existentialists Anonymous, where I got a bunch of people together in a weird environment, and it's like, okay, we're all gonna have an existentially challenging experience and share it with each other. Now, I've been able to do that once, and it actually worked and was kind of amazing. But no, it's not. You under most circumstances, that's exactly what doesn't work. It's like this is part of the reason why, for all that major companies and entertainment conglomerates are really interested in immersive and interactive experiences right now, so few of them are in fact psychomagical. It's because when you are being told you're going to have a great time now, oh, isn't this amazing, or worst of all, you love our brand, that actually that deadens us inside. There's nothing we can work with there. There's nothing we can explore there. No, I think to sort of circle back to the question of, if you want to do this yourself, how do you prepare yourself for it? It's create your own experience by walking towards your blind spots, by walking towards that sense in your head that there's something here that is interesting and scary. Design something to design some art or some experience that moves you towards that. That's where you find that. You find it when you start to lose control, as opposed to when you try to take control, when you try to get more control there. This is something that comes up over and over again in the book, in Turn Your Life into Art, is that notion that at some point you have to lose control. And if you don't let go of control and let the people having the experience lead, then it's over. Because the minute their psyches say, oh, well, I'm blocked here, there's no place interesting for me to go, they stop. They don't engage.
That concept, there's a line in the book, like, you need to give people permission to have their own experience. Mm-hmm. That one, like, I probably repeat that to myself in my head once a week. It's like, oh, and like, I see when it breaks down, and I see when people aren't letting other people have their experience, and I see how terrible the thing goes, where it's like, no, you can only respond politely to me right now. Well, like, what if they don't? Like, then we're all going to have a very interesting experience if they don't. Like, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's where the magic is. Like,
exactly, that's exactly it. It's when you create the conditions for other people to have this experience that and then can let go and let them have it, that it starts to happen. The alternative is, I talk about this explicitly in Turn Your Life into Art. You're creating an infinite garden, not a finite mechanism. You're not creating a mechanism that, okay, people go from A to B to C to D, and then they'll have this experience here and this experience here and this experience here. That it doesn't work that way. There are all kinds of advantages to trying to design it that way, which again is why the theatrical elements have taken over. Yes, in a immersive theatrical performance, you can say, okay, at 10 o'clock the people in these costumes come in, and then at 10:10, they start breaking into this song, and at 10:15, you can stage that, you can repeat that, but you cannot tell people how they're going to feel about it, or create an experience which, okay, at 10:08 they feel pathos, and at 10:12 they're going to think something is hilariously funny. You can create the conditions where that might happen, but you can't actually tell people how to feel. There's nothing less funny than a guy on stage insisting that you think he's funny. Damn it, that just doesn't work. You can have power over people, and so they will laugh at you, politely, or but that's not the same thing as actually being funny. And that's the kind of difference that we're talking about.
So I'm curious, like, then what exactly is the role of the facilitator, the person putting it on, if they're not able to, like, per se move the people through it, but they're creating conditions, like, how does that work? Like, how does a good facilitator exist in this space or whatever?
You are creating the conditions, and often you are one of the distinctions that I mentioned in the book is the difference between performing and channeling. And this is really important. And it's the difference between someone acting and playing a character and someone who is allowing someone else to project onto them and then it's taking a role. Right? Does that make sense? So if let's say we're having some sort of immersive theatrical experiment environment, what have you, and someone comes up and is playing a character and encourages you to play along with that character, that's acting, and someone can be really good at it, and that's performance, and that's great, and you have a good time. Okay. On the other hand, let's say that we're having an experience and this character from Scott Levkoff's Mystic Midway named Mr. Nobody comes up, and Mr. Nobody is the demon who eats fear. And so he asks you, okay, tell me your greatest fear and I will devour it. And now you're in a position where the most important thing that can happen in this moment is not that Scott or whoever is playing Mr. Nobody is doing a really good performance. It's, can they be a receptacle for you to say, this is what I'm really afraid of, and open up that channel, and suddenly you're having a profound conversation about something you don't usually talk about. That ability to receive what the person is projecting out from their psyche, to step into the projection and be part of it.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, that's the key element, and it has nothing to do with performative skill. It has to do with, can you engage with what is coming up and elicit more of it and make them feel safe and comfortable, and to do the challenging and frightening work of bringing that up.
Let me see if I can reflect that to see if I got it right. So like acting where you're like putting all this energy out there and then hoping that people are receiving it. This is the other person's already putting out energy and you're receiving their energy. So you're almost become like a super audience, a super participant instead of a.
From sort of a Jungian standpoint, we all have projections and are projecting things onto people and out into the world that we don't even know about. We are looking for a father figure or a mother figure, or we believe that people are about to abandon us, or what have you. We're always projecting this out. Channeling as a skill for psychomagic involves stepping into that projection and allowing it to becoming a part of it and engaging with it and allowing it to become visible and things to move to either receive it or do things differently. But the essence is that you're not performing a character at someone, you are receiving something from someone's psyche and being able to engage with it in a level that the psyche itself finds interesting. That's one of the key elements. And this can be performative, but often it doesn't even have to be at all. One of the I did a very successful project in 2021. That's what I did instead of going to Burning Man. And then I recently did another version of it in Boston on a book, like my book tour. It's called The Demon Garden. And what happens is that people come into the space, and I talk to them a little bit about the notion of personal demons in our psyches, that we all have these voices in our heads that are telling us to do things, or these urges that we don't understand. And that my collaborators and I were talking about personal mythology and personal demons, and we developed a way to reach into our own heads, identify our personal demons, and pull them out into the world. And when you pull them out into the world, then suddenly you can deal with them very differently, because they're out here and you can talk to them directly and you can see them for what they are, and they're not whispering from the inside of your head. So we did that, and then we created a garden of these demons, of our personal demons, and then we invited other people to come and look through the garden. And then when they have seen those demons, and we actually have an audio tour part component of it, where if you look at it, you see someone's personal demon. If you want to know more, you can press a button on your phone or on a tablet we provide, and then you can hear the person whose demon it is actually talking to you about where it comes from, the impact it's had on their life, and then you go around and you see that, you experience other people's personal demons, and then you have the opportunity to create one yourself. And if someone wants to do that and plant it in the garden, then we give them art tools to bring the demon into the world. So we tell them it's not about making good art. You're not doing that. That's not the image that will eventually be in the garden. You just need to get it out of your head and into the real world. So here, draw it, paint it, whatever you have to do. Don't make it good, just get it out there. And then when they do that and they identify it, they talk to us about it for their own sake and for the audio tour. And then we have a ritual in which we have them burn it, and talk to it about why it needs to go as it's burning it. And then we scatter the ashes around the garden, and a few days later, an image of that demon will appear in the garden. And so we have, somewhere around 60 different images now of, 60 different demons, all created by different people, that serves both as a gallery for people's personal demons and parts of their psyche, and an invitation for other people to leave theirs. And none of this is performative. There's no point at which when I'm doing this, I say, aha, welcome to the demon garden. Oh, the terrors and dangers you shall see. Ah, the delights and fears, what an experience you shall have. Now, there's none of that. It's the essence of that is explaining this, showing them through it, and then saying, you want to do this. And some people will be immediately like, yes, I know what it is, and jump on the paper and about it. And some people will be like, okay, I want to, and I don't understand. And you sort of talk them through, okay, well, just start with an image, or start with a name. You talk them through this process. And then when they have completed, getting them to open up about what it means to them. And then finally, for the ritual, what are they going to say to it? Those are the moments that, receiving that and being someone who can help help someone let it emerge from them. Those are the key skills, much more than any sort of performance element would be.
I do want to know, your in terms of background context, are you familiar with Sultrim Alioni? Because there's a process called feeding your demons, which is Sultrim Alioni is a meditator. Do you know this one, or can I tell you all about this?
No, tell me, please. I think I've the phrase "feeding your demon" as a practice has come up, but I'm not actually really familiar with it.
Okay, so you sit. It's a meditative process. You sit opposite an empty chair, and you imagine the thing that is your demon, and you imagine it in the chair opposite you, and you spend a couple minutes, 5 minutes, vividly bringing this demon into this chair, feeling it, smelling it, seeing it. Like, what would it look like? What would it sound like? And then you greet your demon, and you might say hello to your demon, or say some things that you think you need to say to your demon. You might also ask your demon some questions and get it to tell you some things. And then you imagine yourself dissolving and turning into a puddle, and then feeding the puddle to your demon. And terrifying, possibly. I don't know how vividly you feel demons, but and then you could ask further questions. You could ask, why is this demon doing its thing? But to become your demon, or to deeply accept the nature and shape of the demon that is you, is potentially such a terrifying and such a powerfully moving meditation. There's a little bit more to it, but that's kind of the basic structure.
Yeah.
I feel like my voice changes as I talk about it, go into whispers, and because if it's real, it's real.
Yeah, no, these are not fictional characters for many of the people who are putting them there. These are the people who are going through the demon garden and planting their demons are very much offering up parts of themselves that often they cannot speak about. it's, for some people, it is a deeply profound moment of, acknowledging something and bringing it up and having it witnessed and putting it into the world, and then speaking to it as it turns into ashes. It's not a fictional moment at all. It's one of the things that makes this project really powerful, and that makes Psychomagic really powerful, is that there's no pretend, there's no fiction. You're not saying, let's make believe, okay, I'm an elf lord and you're a real estate magnate. We are who we are in this moment, and everything that I say is going to happen or is happening is exactly what it is. These are in fact people's personal demons. We are in fact bringing them out of our heads and giving them physical reality by turning them into art. We are in fact burning them and scattering the ashes around and the garden, and that will in fact create an image of this demon that now belongs in the garden and stays there. It's all quite literally real. And that's an element of psychomagic, is the more you have to suspend disbelief, the less effective it is likely to be.
I want to branch onto a separate path. I have like two separate paths that I want to go down. One of them is like healthy psyche. Like, where are we going with all this psychomagical stuff? Like, what is the shape of a psyche that is in fact healthy in the world? Like, what are how would you know if someone has like done a bunch of psychomagical experience and improved themselves and had the transformative experience? What is that? How do we know that they're actually better for it? Like, what is the qualities of psyche that is improved because of their experiences? Not because we're trying to force them there, just because right. I'd love to know what healthy is, because no one has the answer to what healthy is. Like, I remember
that's part of it is, I need to emphasize that I'm an artist and amateur philosopher as opposed to
right.
to a therapist. So, but I'm an artist and amateur philosopher who has
therefore I have opinions.
So sure. And actually that's one of the really interesting things about the San Francisco art underground, out of which these techniques emerged, is that they were very interested in the psychology and psychological revolutions of the 60s and 70s that were happening. A couple of key people were ardent Freudians. Jung is very big. All the humanistic psychology in many ways developed somewhat contemporaneously, humanistic and transpersonal psychology, to this art scene, and in some ways it overlapped geographically too. So there's a lot of ways in which emergent trends in psychology from the time were very much a part of this art movement. I think there are a couple of things to recognize. The first of which is that when we ask questions like what is a healthy psyche, we tend to be looking for a set of definable, quantifiable characteristics that we can say, okay, it checks this box, it checks this box. It's numerically, it's 65 as opposed to 42. We're looking for something.
But we want to measure it, hopefully.
Right. We want it to be measurable, and we want it to be in a box. And I don't think that is actually how this works. I think that healthy psyches are dynamic. They are moving. They are changing. They are always in process. And so, one of the things that I would suggest makes a psyche healthy is precisely that it is on a journey and exploring, as opposed to stuck in place. That the more definable and boxable and quantifiable it is, the less healthy it is likely to be. And so that would be one element. And similarly, along similar lines, I think there's a term that one of the pioneering humanistic psychologists, Carl Rogers, came up with, called congruence. And congruence is the degree to which is that quality of being transparent to oneself and others, transparent and honest. So people who are very congruent know what they are feeling in the moment, can understand what they are feeling in the moment, and express it to others in a way that is comprehensible. Whereas people who have very low congruence are sort of black boxes to themselves and everyone else. They don't know what they're feeling. They can't process it. And they certainly can't explain it to others or connect with it. Interestingly, in that project I was just telling you about, the Demon Garden, one of the things we realized in doing it was that we would encounter people whose relationships to their personal demons were very different. We sort of came up with a typology of people. There were people for whom what we would call their personal demons aren't even personifiable. It's just the way the universe is. Let's say that they were dealing with, abandonment issues. It's not that they have a voice in their head telling them you will be abandoned. Nope, they just get abandoned. That's just the way the world is. That's just what it is. It's it's a sort of bedrock reality. They couldn't even see it as an aspect, as personifiable, let alone as an aspect of themselves. Then we had people who could separate it from themselves and the universe to some extent, but it wasn't personifiable. They saw it as a natural process, as not as something that you can give a face and a name and a voice to, but as a volcano or an earthquake or a storm cloud overhead. They had more of a sense of, this is a discrete entity as opposed to a literal reality. But for them, it was still so immense and large that it was a natural process, a force of nature. And then you have people who can say, oh yeah, no, there's this, I haven't thought about it too much, but yeah, there's this trend that I have, this pattern, and it can be personifiable. I could give it a name. And I think that sort of represents that sort of congruence or lack thereof in that sense, that the people who were most able to address their issues were the ones who could in fact personify it and say, this is a pattern, I can give it a name, it has a kind of a personality in my head, as opposed to people for whom, nope, this is just the way the world works. I think
that's interesting. You've done stage development essentially for this, where it's like ego syntonic, ego dystonic, where it's this is what I am. And then it's like, oh, actually, no, this is like the nature of the world. And then that past one of like, oh, this is like a thing in the world. And then it's almost like you're getting that distance each time to be able to engage with it.
It seems like this is very much amateur, psychology developed out of an art project.
This is the best kind of psychology. This is the participatory psychology. This is the experiential psychology. This is the real psychology, not like what you read in a book. This is the ones you do in real life.
Yeah, this is like street psychology, or this would be for us, it would be psychotechnology. You're building out this psychotechnological complex where you have the stage.
You've got the map, or building a map of different relationships to different types of demons or different ways of experiencing them.
There was a historian of psychology who I worked with a while ago, long before I wrote this book, but then he's passed. But his name was Eugene Taylor, and he wrote about the history of psychology. And his framework for this was to say, look, there isn't one psychology with one history. There are actually three different psychologies, and obviously they overlap in some ways and have similar touch points. But actually, if you look at them, they all have different origin stories and central texts and heroes of the discipline and effects they are going for. And one of them was psychology as the development of theory of mind. It was, psychology as the philosophy of the interior. The other is psychology as therapeutic practice. This is the psychology that happens when you go into someone and, say, I need help. And they say, okay, let's talk about it. And, all the psychodynamic therapies, modalities, and cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that fall under this. And then you have psychology as an academic research practice. This is psychology that happens in the laboratory. Okay, under testable, repeatable conditions, what kind of effect can we get? What is a statistically significant correlation? That kind of thing. And that actually, they are all in dialogue, or more frequently in fierce competition and argument with each other. But that they, it's better to talk about psychologies rather than psychology. Which I think is also true of art. It's often better to talk about the arts, plural, as opposed to art, capital A, encompassing everything.
I want to go back to the demon typology, because I kind of want to know which order it goes in, which you seem to describe that it went from force of the universe, I will always be abandoned, to force of the earth, the volcano will always erupt, to person in the world where I could probably avoid the person or dismiss them, and then I can make peace with my demon. I experience it in the other direction, where people in the world are a weaker version of the force, then the volcano is a stronger version of that same force, and the force in the universe being if you can make your peace with the force in the universe, then you've solved that instance of suffering for all your experience for all of time. So like moving in that direction to like dealing with your relationship with abandonment as a feature of the universe is the stronger, more powerful, harder thing to do. Whereas you're describing the like maturing into like personifying and then making peace with someone who would abandon you is the like the more developed or the more mature way to do it.
I wouldn't want to.
I don't know.
I absolutely don't want to say this is
not the ultimate way of being.
Yeah, I think that this is very contextual. That what I'm talking about in the demon garden is that the people who are most able to address their demons, who had the easiest time saying, I've got this, were the ones who could relate to it in a personified way, whereas the people who were least able to engage in the process, who were most threatened by it, the people most likely to have a freak out when they were, going through this, and asking people for whom it was a universal force, they couldn't even look at it that way. That said, I think that what you're talking about when you say, actually the healthiest ways to go towards that sense of, this is something happening in the universe and I have to make my peace with it, speaks to something I mentioned this briefly in Turn Your Life into Art, but there's a practice called existential integrative therapy, and it asks these questions from sort of a series of concentric circles going in. At the outermost layer, if someone has an issue, you ask yourself, okay, is there something in the physical environment that is causing this, right? Is there something that they're inhaling? Is there making bad food choices? Are they dehydrated? Something like that. And then if that doesn't seem to be the case, then you move into, what's going on with them socially, and how are they being treated by the people around them? And until you eventually reach the most central point, which is the existential condition of humanity. We are going to die. We are bodies, we are mortal. And that you apply the appropriate therapeutic modality to what someone's actually dealing with, because you don't ask big existential questions of a child who's in an abusive family, right? I mean, that's just that's not the intervention they need. On the other hand, you don't recommend diet and fitness tips to someone who is struggling with the mortality of life, or who is dealing with psychosexual issues. You figure out where in these series of concentric circles going in someone is, and you address that there. So I think in that sense, that to me, what you're describing is ultimately you're making peace with the universe. That I think that speaks to that. That there's a level at which going in, that is ultimately what you have to do.
I've changed my mind. having just said that to you and make peace with the universe is seems like the healthier direction. Actually, wait a second. I have a different idea, and it's that in fact there is an appropriate distance where to make peace with being abandoned in the universe, as your example, right? The universe will always abandon me is really painful. But to make peace with that one guy left me, I was friends with him and now I'm not, is super easy. And this is like a spectrum, and somewhere in the middle is the appropriate distance of struggle that I could move my perception of this. It's not quite the universe, it's not quite this one guy, but it's the volcano that I need to contend with, and to hit it at the right layer or the right level, as you describe with existential psychotherapy. You find the right layer that is appropriate to work with. That's a really powerful modality.
Yeah. Again, you're meeting people where they're at. What we discovered in the Demon Garden project was that the people who were most able to engage with the project at all, least likely to freak out, and most able to have a profound experience were the ones who could then identify, there's something going on in my head about this. It's not that the universe always abandons me. It's that, as a result of the way my father treated me, I was expecting that. And so I've created this demon now. I've reached into my head. I've identified this demon that is that voice, and I've made it real, and I can look at it, and now I can talk to it. Now we're burning it. And, that's where that kind of action was able to happen. People could freak out if, they were at the level of, no, I'm just always abandoned, but that wasn't the level to be addressed then.
I have a hunch of what's going on is that if you're at that extreme, you're God always abandons me. it's not a demon, it's actually God always abandons me. And that's very frustrating and unfair and harder to deal with than if we like dial it down a couple notches and be like, no, it's a demon that's my abandonment. Like I can argue with the demon, I can contend with it, but like if God abandons me, like that's really hard for me to accept.
Yeah.
But it like demon is like a particular, it's not like just some guy who walked out on me. It's like slightly more powerful than a guy, but slightly less powerful than God. We're like meeting in the like appropriate demon quality level.
And there's a part of my head that I can actually talk to about this. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. I love it. I'm like, do I want to do my own demon garden? Like, this is terrifying to me, dude. Like, even personify some of my demons, because I'm like up this end of the scale with it. I'm like, oh no, that thing doesn't get personified yet. I'm not ready.
I gotta tell you, there were two other artists who I collaborated with closely on this project, who are also the co-creators of it. Laurel Stella, who did the art for it, and Nicole Johnson, who did a lot of the conceptualizing logistics for it. And when we were first setting it up, when we were first creating it, we eventually, had to come up with a rule. I had to eventually set a protocol that no one summons a demon alone. That we cannot work in this in a siloed way, because we were having freakouts individually doing our stuff, putting this together. We were starting to freak out about it, and in some ways classic Burning Man art project style freakouts, but also very deeply personal stuff was coming up. And so I was finally like, okay, nope, we do this all together, or at least in pairs. Nobody works on this project just by themselves, because it's too much stuff is coming up. So yeah, no, it was
safety measures for summoning demons.
I want to go down the path here. The other thread I wanted to go down was creative blocks, because like this is you, like a demon coming up and scaring me out of the project is something I could call a creative block. But I imagine, like, in even trying to like design these psychomagical experiences, you're dealing with creative blocks that would be like mammoth in comparison to someone who's like, I'm procrastinating on my writing. Like, you're dealing with monsters coming out of the artwork, literally saying, go home. Like, you shouldn't be doing this art project. Like, what do you do about that? Like, what resources do you have for you? Do you suggest for others for dealing with creative blocks? Is creative block just another demon that you should like put it in the project and then like play with it?
I don't think of it so much as a block, because I think it is very distinct from sort of a writer's block where you're just staring at a page and not knowing what to do. I guess I think of blocks as being, nope, I'm stuck, as opposed to I'm scared out of my mind, or this is really, really freaking me out. But you're absolutely right that does happen, and it's a bit of a paradox that the better you get at this, the more likely that is to happen.
Right. And it's also probably the scarier and harder your blocks are, right? They get bigger and more monstrous. Because you're in touch with something painful when it says like go away.
And that's exactly the point, though, is that's how you're onto something. Is that if you're not having those kinds of reactions, then your project may very well be inert. Not a guaranteed thing. I mean, it could be exactly right for someone else, but if that kind of thing isn't coming up, then it's going to be inert for you. It's when you are having those experiences that you're like, okay, this could be successful. I have to follow them. If that comes up, you walk in that direction. That what you're calling the block is actually the guide. It's showing you where you need to go. And you don't have to go there naively. You, again, turn it into art in some way. You can create a container for it. You can be clever and smart about how you are summoning it. But the block is the guide at that point. That's what you walk towards. And for other people, their stuff is, again, where you go. You're not performing at them, you are channeling their stuff. And so when someone's stuff starts to come up, okay, that's where we're going with this. That's the moment where you cede control to someone else's psyche and you become a channeler and allow it to move through it, and you handle it hopefully carefully and creatively and in ways that are supportive and inviting and safe. But that's where you go. Yeah, that's not a block so much as a sign of success. That's the guide. That's lightning striking in the distance.
This is something you said, channeling someone else's stuff, and this is something I'm super curious about, because from time to time, you used Mr. Nobody as he was the demon, but like occasionally you're going to end up wearing someone else's stuff. You're going to be the face of someone's father who abused them.
Mm-hmm.
How do you effectively, healthily support it, holding that while supporting them in their pain? Like I'm now the face of your abusive father. Like, don't punch me, please, because that's still me.
And
I'm also
going to try to make you feel safe.
Right. Like what?
It doesn't really like.
How do you work with that?
Yeah, well, first let's acknowledge that, you know, in the example you just gave, that's a really intense thing happening.
Right. That's a big one. That's
a big one. So, but channeling is a set of skills all in and of itself. And what you and the good news for this is that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be the cleverest. It is all about, to use a sort of a hackneyed phrase, but it's about holding that space. The other person's psyche knows what it wants. It is attempting to do this on purpose. And so you can follow its lead. It is taking you where it needs to go. You have to be able to hold space for that. You have to be able to not take it personally. You have to be able to, you know, invite it to engage. But and hopefully, you know, your experience is designed in such a way that has someplace to go. But the point is that this is where you actually cede control. You don't type down on it and say, okay, nope, this is coming up, so this is what we're doing. You have a person who is projecting something out into the world, and you have stepped in and become what they are projecting on. And in this process, what once was invisible, because you're not the first person they projected this onto. That's been happening there, you know, for a long time now, right? You know, that's been something they've been doing since their childhood, is projecting that this is a thing that I expect from people, and this is what's happening, and I see you playing this role. Now you're making what was invisible visible, and what was unconscious conscious. And so now it's going to be a whole different dynamic for this person, and your job is to create a space for it, to make it be okay to have this happen, to give it an outlet, but then otherwise just to follow where it wants to go. People are tremendously self-destructive in their psyches, but they're also very self-healing in their psyches. And this is a moment where the self-healing aspects that people bring to it are going to be emergent and hopefully dominant in making that possible. And so in many ways, what you're doing is the opposite of seizing control. It's letting it play out, letting it happen, only it's now visible and conscious.
And they could like take back that control.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a big thing.
Letting everyone see it for what it is. Yeah.
So and like them being like choosing to engage in that that thing where in the first place they may not have chosen to be doing that.
They're often doing unconsciously. Yeah.
It's a big thing with PTSD, is where it often happens where the person doesn't have control over the situation. And so like what you're doing, I guess, is letting them like replay that, but they're the ones in control. And also it's like safe because you're not actually the abusive father.
I don't know that it's necessarily replaying it so much as it's playing out and now something different is possible. But yeah, it's coming up from that place, and now we're doing a theme and variation instead of it going the way that it usually does when someone does it unconsciously and invisibly. Now, because it is conscious and visible, we have more options. We have options where it can happen. Right, we can move it in a different direction. We can have something different occur. You know, in the case of the demon garden, instead of you know, just listening to your demon, now you're talking to it. Now you are, you know, now you are telling it what it needs to hear, and we've taken it out of your head, and now we are burning it and we are putting it someplace. You know, but you don't. But when the demon is coming up, you let that come up. You let that happen. You know, you don't tell them, oh, well, your demon's probably this way, not that way. You know, no, let it emerge. It's in a lot of these cases where something like that happens, you know, your job is to create the conditions under which someone's own capacity for self-healing can take the reins. In the case of, a Mr. Nobody situation, someone tells you a fear that is in fact not, when people want to get out of that experience, they'll say spiders, they'll give you something generic and and get out of there. That's fine if they don't want to play at that level, if they're not moved to, okay. But when someone says something that is really profoundly deep and goes there, and you're Mr. Nobody, your job is to listen, to hear it, to talk about it with them, and then to devour that fear. You're doing exactly what you said you would do, and you're letting them decide how deep they go, what the encounter is like. You're receiving, you're channeling, as opposed to saying, okay, I've got a 5-point plan for this now. I'm going to take control of the situation. I'm going to tell you how this is different. You don't go into lecture mode. You receive it and do exactly what was promised when the encounter started.
I have a question here. Usually I would lean on the side of psyches are self-healing. People are in charge of their own experience. They will go where they need to go if you let them. And then I occasionally get this possibility of like psyches don't know what's good for them, or like sometimes people's psyches can lead them to unsafe places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just don't have an answer to like, I trust myself and I trust my own ability to hold myself in a good space. And I generally trust other people to take themselves where they need to go. And then also sometimes my own like warning bells are like, hey, this person doesn't know what's safe for them. Mm-hmm. Like I'm like if there's a knife on the table, I'm like, oh, maybe they'll like actually stab themselves with it. Like what do you do if you're like, wait a second, I don't know if I do trust the other person's creative healing capacity? Like, are they gonna like they mention a fear that's too unsafe and they're gonna go home and be ashamed about it for the next month and maybe do something stupid? Like, what do you do when the other person's healing capacity isn't available? Is that them choosing their own experience and therefore it's up to them? Or like, is there some responsibility to like be like, time out, you need to talk to someone about that one? Because I don't want to break my psychomagical experience and be like, time out, but also like,
I've had that question. I've had that question come up. There was in early 2020, right before the pandemic, alas, I was conducting a series of what I called mad art experiments that involved putting people under hypnosis and then putting them through an art experience that I had created some years earlier, and seeing what would happen. I honestly didn't know, and I was very explicit with people about this. I was saying, I have never done this before. I have never combined these elements. I have no idea how this is going to go. And I found myself not only in several cases with this, but at the very first one out of the gate, someone who was in that trance state, having the experience, suddenly weeping in a way that I had not prepared for, I was not aware of. And I had to ask myself, okay, what's the right thing to do here? Is the right thing to do to complete the experience with the possibility that this is doing damage? Or is it to pull them out of the experience with the possibility that will then deny catharsis? And, I have no access to their internal life. I don't know what's happening. I only know that I conducted an experiment where I don't know how this works. And suddenly, I'm encountering this. And in that case, I decided that the best thing to do was to go through the experience, and that was the right decision. It turned out the person was like, "Yeah, no, this was incredibly cathartic for me. This was really helpful." Okay, whew. But you don't know, and you are dealing with experiences, and let's be very blunt about this. I'm very clear about this in turning your life into art. These are not, if you're doing this right, this is not benign. You are not just engaging in fun little activities. That this is, you are aiming for something that is profound and big and potentially transformative and cathartic, and that so you are playing with fire. You are using live ammunition, and so things absolutely can go wrong. And
well, I would say people can get themselves into abusive relationships. Like they don't know what's healthy for them. They're just going into abusive. Like people will do that to themselves.
No, absolutely. I am not someone who believes, though, that as artists we have no responsibility for how people react to our art. I think we need to acknowledge that we are imperfect and that we can never be sure. And I think that we also have to recognize that to get this kind of experience, you can't put too many guardrails up. That if you make it too safe, you make it inert. But at the same time, it is important to recognize that we are playing dangerous games and that we have ethical responsibilities to be able to deal with that. And the key elements, I think, are not to make the experiences themselves less dangerous, although there are times, sure, but but in general, the better approach is to get better at handling danger. I mean, for the case of if someone is freaking out in the middle of your experience, what do you do? Well, I think if you want to get good at this, you should get good at working with people who are freaking out. I mean, do you have experience talking people through that? Have you had experience talking people through bad trips? Have you had, experiences talking with your friends through difficult and circumstances they're in? Because that's the same skill set at that point. There have been cases in the Demon Garden. There were a couple of cases where I, at some point, and then this was all voluntary, right? No one was forced to do anything. It was, would you like to look at the demons? Would you like to go through the audio tour? Would you like to create it yourself? So at every step, there was an off ramp. And still, there were a couple of cases where I was like, okay, we're pulling back now. You've tried to do something. You're actually freaking out way too much. Let's have a talk. Let's just talk. And so I think most of the time, assuming the setup isn't abusive, that I think it is generally better to go through the art process, and let people work things through. But there are times, and there's not a clear guide to okay, this is when you eject, but when you may have to. I mean, people's psyches are both self-healing and self-destructive. You're absolutely right about that. I mean, one of the reasons why people need this in the first place is that they go through complexes, they have projections, their psyches are weaponized against them. And I think I think that's the rut that they are stuck in. And when you give people the opportunity to do something different with that, the self-healing stuff takes over just by virtue of, okay, this is different, this is unique. But I got to be honest, it's much less that I have a compelling theory as to why this engages the self-healing aspect of people's psyches, as that I have seen it happen over and over again. This is, this is a case where the practice has led the theory. I've seen this happen. I have a whole, subculture's worth of reports of, yep, this is what happens. We get very few projects that, actually create problems. And so, okay, we see that it works. And now we're trying to ask ourselves, okay, how do we work with that? How do we figure that out? I think that the important thing for sort of a design perspective is that you avoid creating projects where you always have to be in charge, which is also, links us back to, you need to let go, you need to let other people have control and lead. But if the project requires people to come out saying, oh my God, you're so amazing, artist. Oh, look at what you have done for me, artist. Or, yes, I will do what you tell me, artist. If your design leads in that direction, it's probably abusive. It is,
right, because it's about control. It's about the artist directly limiting someone's experience into a certain box and being like, you had to have a bad time experience. Here you go. Right.
Yeah. Something that how did Chicken John and I put it in his book of the Is, which I assisted in writing. But he talked about how, the idea is to create a sustainable ecology of crank, wherein you can be a general one day and a foot soldier the next. If you the more the project requires you to be in charge and the big person and the powerful person, the more it is probably just ego gratification and abusive design. So I think it's vitally important to avoid that. It's vitally important. That's a big part of the difference between the San Francisco School of Psychomagic and cult design. That's a big part of the difference. Is you're letting other people lead. You are creating an experience, and then they get to lead. They get to be in charge. You follow where they go. But when that happens, it seems like the self-healing properties of people's psyches take over. That if you can reach them there and give them the opportunity to do something different, they'll do that. They will often take that opportunity.
I'm just sitting with this ability to be a general and then a foot soldier, and at the same time, with the requirement to have a real experience, the requirement to not pretend, not to be someone else, but to actually be you having this experience, and like trying to fit them together.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that should apply for the psychomagical facilitator as well as the participant, right? You need to be you.
Very much so. Yeah. Again, the more they have to suspend disbelief to, think of you, the more that gets in the way. The capacity of a facilitator to have their honest experience be what's coming up. And it's interesting. It's again, to take this back to humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers, he would talk about the need for a therapist to have unconditional regard for the person in therapy. And that this is complicated because on the one hand, if someone is going to have a successful therapeutic encounter, the therapist has to have unconditional regard for them. On the other hand, the therapist has to be congruent and not bullshitting the
Right.
patient, not smiling at everything they say and saying, "Oh, that's so good." It has to be, you have to have your honest reactions come up, and so you have to work on multiple levels at once. In which, on the one hand, you are offering unconditional regard, and on the other hand, you are being completely honest about your feelings and responses. And I think again that is very similar to what we encounter in people who are very good at what I've called channeling for this, is that you have to keep it from becoming about you. It is not, this is not what you are going through, it is what the person who's having the experience is going through. So you have to be able to keep yourself from getting in the way. And at the same time, you're 100% right, Elliot, that it is so much more powerful and potent when you are bringing your authentic self to that encounter. And it means so much more. The effect is so much greater. And so, yeah, both are true at once. Both things are true at once. And that's really at the heart of the heart of it, is to be wholly present with someone as yourself, and to keep from getting in the way so that they can have the experience that they need. And you're just there in the way that facilitates that.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a similar question in therapy circles of like, how much should the therapist self-disclose? And then there's a famous therapist who passed away recently named Irvin Yalom, who was like, as much as you need.
I hadn't heard.
I thought he passed away. I thought maybe, let me just double check.
You're probably right. I mean, but
he was like 80, I think. 1931. Oh, maybe he hasn't. I'm wrong.
But yeah, so Irvin Yalom.
But he says, if you feel like disclosing, disclose. Obviously, make the session about the other person. But if you feel like disclosing, disclose. Whereas other therapeutic schools sort of say like, don't disclose, don't reveal stuff. And then there's always this the client stories that come out of like, and then my therapist spent half an hour talking about their divorce, and I was like, why are you telling me this? And like, obviously a battle, but it seems like slightly on the like, share some stuff about you seems like a good rule.
I think, I don't know that you need to disclose too much. Sometimes maybe, sometimes no, but being honest about who you are and your reactions, I think definitely.
Well, the other question I come to is with the School of Transpersonal Psychology, or even Abraham Maslow came up with pyramid of needs, and then later added transpersonal and self-transcendence above his pyramid in his late life. He added these levels of, when you grow up, your life is more of a participatory psychology experience rather than an individual. Like, your individual ego is more like a collective ego experience. And so if you're not disclosing, you're actually not stepping into that transpersonal relational domain of like, it's all kind of connected, or we're always connected. And so you're just pretending that some of it's not there, which is like a lessening of your being or something.
No, and sometimes disclosing can be absolutely the right thing. But again, that's being honest in the moment. It's not about your need to share the story. It's about the fact that it really seems to come up here, that the encounter we're having actually calls for this, that this would be an honest response that actually would engage with what they are doing and what they are telling. It's, if the disclosure is following their lead, then yes,
Right.
absolutely.
So if you were like, I actually have the same demon or a very similar demon to you, that would be a great disclosure, right? Potentially.
Could be, yeah.
It's sometimes, yeah, interesting. In this the spectrum of, is it just some guy who abandoned me, or is it the volcano of abandonment, or the universe of abandonment? Getting the like, hey, other people get abandoned too, can be the step in the right direction to making peace with universality.
Yeah. Well, that's actually why, part of why the demon garden is set up in the way it is, where you have all those people's demons, and before you ask, we send them through that before we ask, do you want to add one? Because that experience of seeing other people's demons, of hearing them talk about their demons, of saying, oh, that one resonates with me, or I don't understand that one at all, or, ooh, wait a minute, I hadn't thought about it this way. But yeah, that really puts them into the spirit of knowing that they are not alone, that this is a common human thing, that, that alone is a really powerful element. And it really matters that we show them everyone else's before we ask if they want to contribute.
Okay, I have a kind of complicated question here. It's something like, the more I do in terms of therapeutic psychological domain, it feels like I get worse at these things. Like sometimes the things that I've done means that like I've exhausted some of my traumas, and so I'm like, oh, no trauma, none of that anymore to complain about. I've got to like dig deeper or something, like find, like it's harder for me to find a new demon because I've expunged a couple of them already. Like the ones that were like daily demons, well, they're gone. Now I have the like deeper, harder, more hidden, more shameful, I don't know. Like what do you do? You've participated, I imagine, in a lot of psychomagical experiences. Does it get easier again? Does it get harder again? Does it like, are you reaching deeper into your soul? Is it just more participation? Like, how do you stay in it?
Like it gets different, certainly, and nobody can live in that state full time, right? I mean, liminal states are liminal for a reason. You eventually go back to the normal world in some way. Nobody lives in the underworld all the time, but it gets different. There is definitely a way in which the kinds of experiences that could be profound for you early on no longer have that level of profundity. I mean, that's absolutely a thing. And so you find yourself, walking through, other people's designs, going, oh yeah, no, that's great. I used to love that. Oh, I'm so glad it's having an effect. Wonderful.
It's like nostalgic instead of triggering.
Yeah. And
I mean, I think I had the same experience. I was a bit of a circus performer, and learning to juggle, the more you realize that the like audience claps like if you do a basic thing, and they don't even care if you do a complex thing. You like, right. You threw 17 balls up in the air and you caught them all. They're like, woo! You like did a box with 3 balls and they're like, woo! Like, ah.
Yeah. No, that's it. And I think the question that I would ask in response to your question is, how do you want to orient yourself to these practices? Because listen, if you're just going through this and it is what it is for you, and hopefully it's helpful and healing in some way or engaging, and then it has sort of stopped, that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. If on the other hand you want to turn it into a avocation, into some form of your life's work, well then yeah, you're going to be always going deeper and looking for what comes next and creating experiences for others that no longer speak to you the way they once would have, but you learn through that. I mean, there's sort of a process that happens when you want to turn this into your life's work, and one of the things is that you end up creating more than you than you experience, in part because you now have those skills that you can offer people. And part of it is that, yeah, you're looking for the next challenges and the new deep things and following it deeper. But it's like, in that sense, it's like anything that becomes an avocation. Over time, your relationship to it changes, and what once was incredibly hard now is, sort of easy to the point of being second nature, and you're looking for new avenues of exploration, and it changes your life starts to sort of warp around that. And if that's what you want, then great. I mean, one of the things that I joke about in the book is that, I had a joke with the artist Robin Zero, that if we were to create a new, a new support group for psychomagical artists, it would be called the Life Ruiners Guild. Not because we're ruining other people's lives, because we're ruining our own. That the ongoing pursuit of this, your life warps around it in ways, and that's what happens. It's you are actively going into fraught psychological territory there. So okay, but but if the answer to the question is, what kind of relationship to this stuff do you want to have? And one of the great things about the San Francisco scene, one of the things that made this possible, was exactly that you had a large, city-sized community that was actively engaged in these processes and pushing one another and going forward. And so it wasn't just a bunch of solo practitioners who were all trying to push their own boundaries and seeing what they could get away with their friends. It was, it was a culture, it was a movement. It was people all designing this stuff for each other and actively pushing their own boundaries and the boundaries of what had been done before. And, and that made it much more feasible to keep going and going and going and going. That large scale collaboration of an active scene and subculture was in many ways what made a lot of this possible, because it wasn't a solo journey at that point. It was a
community of practice.
It's incredible.
It was a community of practices, a practice that can self-contain multiple communities of practices. You had people who tended to disagree with each other about things. You had rivalry. You worked with so and so. I hate so and so. Or but they were all doing the thing and moving it in their own directions in ways that, because it was known and public and available, made it better for everybody. Opened up all kinds of windows and possibilities. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna throw you what I think is a tricky question, because you've just said the phrase, what kind of relationship do you want to have to this stuff? All right. And earlier I was asking, like, when I asked how to become a better participant of psychomagical design, you said don't show up with a plan or a system or a way of, like, and these feel like they're in direct opposition, both like don't show up with anything and also like, what kind of relationship do you want to have? So is this a progression? Like, in the beginning, you start with like, don't have a relationship, and later you're like asking how you want it to be? Or is there like some other way that these knit together?
Well, I think it's the difference between showing up to other people's stuff and what you bring to that, and then how you design your own stuff and what you bring to it.
Right.
In the former case, the worst way that I can participate in someone else's experience is to come in and go, well, I'm really an expert at this kind of thing. Yeah, that reminds me of the thing John did the one time. That reminds me of the thing John Lotto. I saw that at Burning Man. One time Danger Ranger did that. I've seen that.
There's nothing new under the sun. It's a real problem once you become an expert, because you start seeing it all. Yeah. John did that better.
If I'm going to go to somebody else's stuff and participate in it, I should bring my beginner's mind as much as I possibly can. I should go in neither with a sense that, I'm going to have a transformative experience now, but also not with been there, done that. It's the beginner's mind is, I think, always the right way to approach this as a participant. As someone who is actively trying to move the ball forward with it, actively trying to find new approaches, actively trying to challenge myself, that's a different dynamic. At that point, it behooves me, on the one hand, sure, to bring beginner's mind to my own experiences too, but also to have the sense of okay, what have I done before? Where is the new challenge? Because if you keep doing the thing that once inspired you, eventually you run out of inspiration there. And if you're looking for where is that new edge, if the thing that reveals itself to you is the block, as you called it, that's where the new energy is. Yeah, you have to go looking for that. You have to push yourself in ways. And what's particularly bizarre and amazing and frustrating is that if you train yourself well enough to do this, then, like I say, your life starts to warp around it. Opportunities start to present themselves, synchronicities start to happen. And I don't necessarily mean that in a sort of a, magical way, but in the sense that anything you train yourself at, in a hardcore, profound way, is going to change the way you view the world. The more you learn about music, the more you are going to hear it in different places. The more you become a therapist, the more you are going to see things in other people as you talk with them. The more you train to drive a car at high speeds, the more different being in ordinary traffic is going to be for you. The same thing applies here, that the more you train yourself to experience and create psychomagical experiences, the more the world is going to seem to suddenly be full of weird opportunities for that to happen.
I imagine that's like a huge benefit. Like that's what you want. Like the more you're training to see the psychomagic, the more psychomagic just shows up all the time in your everyday mundane life.
It is profound, and it is also, like I say, life ruiners guild. There are ways in which it beats you over the head. I mean, I have to tell you, there was a time in my life not too long ago when I was a writer. And I had a great relationship with my creative unconscious. I would want to write a short story or a novel or something, and I'd go, okay, we're doing this. And my creative unconscious would go, okay, we're doing this. And I'd start to write, and I could produce on demand. And I was clearly in charge of the process. The more I explored psychomagic, and the more that became the essence of my practice, the less in charge I became. I am not in charge of my creative unconscious anymore. That is not the relationship. It calls a lot more of the shots. And on the one hand, that is profound and amazing. Some of what I would regard as the best experiences I've created were things that, not things that I thought of, but things that suddenly emerged out of my psyche and lodged themselves in my conscious mind. Okay, I guess I'm doing that now. Sure, all right. On the other hand, I don't get to tell my psyche, okay, we're doing this now. It's
today is Psychomagic Day.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm not in charge anymore, and that is a whole different way to live life. That can be weird and uncomfortable and frustrating. But it's a noteworthy change, and it's not unique to me. Other people have reported similar experiences there. The further down you go into saying, okay, I'm going to follow where the greater psyche leads, the more that's what happens.
So I definitely got to ask then, have you taken this and put this in the demon garden?
No, not yet. There's the other demons of mine ended up in the demon garden start, and then I got busy facilitating it that I didn't put any more in. No, that's an interesting question. I feel like I talk to my creative unconscious a lot, but maybe I should create something to really sort of say, okay, you and me, we're going to have a talk, and we're going to get an even playing field here. That's it. Mm-hmm. I like that.
Well, you also describe almost like a religious relationship, like to your unconscious as a deity almost, and in a good way, that you want to be reverent towards your psyche. It says, let's perform here, and you're like, yes, master, I will follow you. Like, maybe you don't want to like a pure relationship with it. Maybe you do want it to like stay as it is, and it's the one in charge.
I go back and forth on that, but generally speaking, yes, I'm actually I'm actually overall quite happy with the new relationship I have with it. The level at which it has led me to create compelling and amazing things that I am proud of and that really speak to me is extraordinary and deeply meaningful to me. I would like to be able to occasionally say, okay, I'm gonna write a new book now. Let's just do that. Yeah, no, on the whole, I've found it, well, I've chosen to do this and I do not regret the choice. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like it sounds like you've like, at least a part of what's going on is you've shifted from being a writer to a psychomagician, I guess they call it.
In many ways, yeah. I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. It's one of these things that you look back on and go, oh, that was happening, wasn't it? It wasn't a deliberate choice so much as oh, this seems interesting. Oh, no, this seems interesting. Oh, that's kind of inspiring. Oh, what a great idea I just had. And then 5 years later, you look back and go, oh, those were all steps on this path, weren't they? Here now. Okay. But yeah, actually, a lot, I still do lots of writing, obviously, but the in many ways, the focus of my art has shifted from writing things for people to read to creating experiences that I have with people.
Yeah, I think that's sorry.
In fact, for a while this past summer, I was doing these regular shows, semi-regular shows at a local theater that I was calling the Apocalypse Cabaret. And I realized when I started doing them that something had shifted in me and that I was no longer interested in performing for people, but I did want to create experiences to have with people. That, the whole nature of what I was doing when I set up a show had changed in that way.
It's like a pair relationship rather than I perform for you.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't like I one day said, let me have a new manifesto for what I want to do. It just became very clear that given a space to do things with people, even a conventional theater space, I'm no longer interested in any way in going in and let me put on the show for you. Well, an evening with caveat has been.
I love that voice that you do. Like, it draws me in. It makes me want to see more of it. I know you don't like to do it, but I like watching it.
a lot of old performance. No, it's fun. It's fun as shtick. But yeah, what I was much more interested was, okay, we're in a space together. There's a stage. Let's see what kind of experience we can create together. What are we going to do? Yeah, that had shifted without my realizing it until I started putting on shows again after a long pandemic break, and then suddenly I went, oh, this has completely changed for me. I didn't even know, but there it is.
Mm-hmm. It's like more live when the people are like participating, I think.
Oh, it really is. Yeah. And you don't know what's going to happen as a result. It's really boring to me now to go and do traditional book events where I get up on a stage or at a podium in a bookstore or something and read chapters from people and then take questions. I'm done with that. I don't ever want to do that sort of thing again. If I'm going to do a book event, well, let's do something more interesting than that. You can buy the book and read the book on your own time, but what got you here? Let's do something.
Let's do an activity from the book or what?
Yeah,
like what kind of stuff you do.
Something book inspired in some way. But yeah, let's not waste our time. Having me read to you what you can read at home. Let's do something together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, like, this is a special request from a big fan, do you have a psychomagical experience that you could take us through in this moment?
Inspired now. Let's talk to the unconscious. Forget the conscious. We're not interested anymore because we know who the real driver is.
You know us a bit better now. This is an hour and a half in.
Yeah. So
I don't really want to put you on the spot if it's like, I know it's hard. Like I just said, like, do the hard thing.
Yeah. We can come up with a big finish here. Okay. It is much harder to do this kind of thing over a video call than it is in person for obvious reasons. You have all kinds of limitations on the design elements, and it is harder to take the necessary risks that I think are really important for this kind of thing. It is doable. It takes generally a lot more sort of prep and development. But okay, let's let's do this. Let's do this. Since we are streaming and I'm presuming recorded, anyone who is listening or watching this who doesn't want to participate, just don't. You have the option of opt out completely and totally. There will be no involuntary participation here. But at least for us, something that I have been doing has been something that I've been calling underground story time or underworld story time, which is sort of listening to stories while told in a kind of a trance state. So let's have both of you sit back and relax for a moment and take some deep breaths with me. Good. Good. And we're just going to relax in this moment. We are just going to relax in this moment. And I am going to ask you, we're not going too terribly deep here. We're not aiming for anything particularly profound. We are just going to have a moment. And I'm going to ask as we go, your unconsciouses, I'm going to ask directly to your psyches if they want to participate, if they want to engage. But keep your eyes closed and take deep breaths and listen to my voice and follow my voice. And let's just see if we can go down for a moment, if we can go down deeper for a moment, if we can go deeper down and further down and relax and rest and be open. Let's see if we can reach a point where we are safe and warm and relaxed. As we just go down a bit more deeply, can we be safe and warm and relaxed? And as we do that, become more and more open to whatever happens next. We are safe and open, warm and relaxed, following my voice, deeper and deeper down. Following my voice, deeper and deeper down. And soon, shortly, we will have an experience. Soon, shortly, there will be a little bit of art as we go deeper and deeper down. Deeper and deeper down. Deeper and deeper down, following my voice. Further and further as we go deeper and deeper down. Deeper and deeper down. And normally at this point, I would have set something up in which there would be some sort of mechanism in which you could choose a story that I would read to you, so that there would be a meaningful choice you would make for this experience as you follow my voice deeper and deeper down, so that there would be a way in which you could choose directly what it is that happens next, even if you don't understand what it is, even if it is an intuitive choice. But since there are two of you, and since this is improvised, I am going to go now to the first book I ever wrote, called A Guide to Bars and Nightlife in the Sacred City. And just follow my voice as we go. And imagine the sacred city, whatever that is to you. Whatever that is to you. As we walk towards, as we go deeper and deeper down, walk towards the sacred city. And think of that. And I will open with the preface from this book as we go deeper and deeper down. And I invite you, I ask your psyche, I invite your psyche to not just listen to the words, but to have a sensory experience of it, to let yourself be immersed in the story, to let this moment reach you, to let yourself engage with that. And this is the preface. And follow my voice, go deeper with each breath. And let's see what happens as I read. I first discovered the sacred city just before the turn of the millennium, when I was a freelance nightlife reporter for Playboy.com. I was traveling across America, and then Europe, and then Russia, and then the Middle East, waking up each morning not knowing which city I would fall asleep in. I would dream of Venice before drinking at Belgian bars, and have visions of Jerusalem in Prague. Cities became pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, connecting in ways that you could not see on a map, to reveal the secret order of the universe. If God is in all of us, then there is more divinity in a city of 10 million souls than there is in Stonehenge, the pyramids, or a sliver of the true cross. Cities pulse with rough love, unevenly spaced over boulevards and across alleys. If we tape enough heartfelt wishes on streetlights and leave enough dreams on the curb, anything can happen. Millions of souls in crowded neighborhoods, praying beneath the surface of their daily lives, lead to manifestations of the miraculous and infernal just around the corner. A block of Paris where fire dancers spin outside Notre Dame connects to a sliver of Chicago where angels dance in a speakeasy that attaches to miraculous Thai food in London and to a faith healing in San Francisco, to an architectural marvel in Moscow and a tantric revelation in New Orleans, to a lost opera in Vienna and a resurrection in Pittsburgh and the perfect couch appearing on Craigslist in Toronto, never stopping. That is the sacred city. And I ask you now, having heard that, having heard that every city is in fact a neighborhood in the collective unconscious, to ask, where is the sacred city for you? What, as you round that corner, as you see that building, as you open that door, what appears? What comes next in the sacred city for you? Let yourself have that moment. Let it come to you, let it emerge for you. And then in a moment, we are going to come back together and you can share what it is that came up, what it is that you saw, what it is that you felt, what it is in the sacred city that emerged after hearing that, as you heard that. And let's come back in 3, 2, 1, and with me now. And Daniel, you there? Great. So I don't know, get anything from that?
Gotta go with yes. Check on Daniel.
Yeah, I don't normally go that deep because it takes a while to come in and out. But thank you for that. That was really nice. Yeah, I was back in Jerusalem, and I was young again. Yeah, like young, like early 20s, and like realizing that I think a lot of what I'm trying to do is to manifest that city, that like the new, I don't know, I guess like that continuity of energy of the sacred city into the future as well, because like I'm feeling like I'm starting to move past that inflection point of that sacred cityness being transmitted through me, I guess. I don't know, I don't have the words for it, but yeah.
But Jerusalem in some ways symbolizes that for you.
Yeah, like I had the Dome on the Rock, Western Walls show up for me.
I would love it. I would invite you to create some art, whether it's an image or an essay or a short story or something on that theme of Jerusalem and those experiences, and trying to get them into the future. I think there may be something for you there.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe bring it back to a future show. I don't know, but good.
I don't
Thank
know
you.
that I have that ability. Like I think like this like art and writing and stuff, it's like a skill that needs to be developed.
We'll see what comes. See if there's something that can be shaped with it, or even working with another artist. See if this is. I think it is not coincident. I think it is meaningful that this is that not only that this came up for you, but you had such a strong reaction for it. So there's something there I'd invite you to explore. There's that's what I'll say. Yeah. And
Sure.
Elliot, anything come up with you?
Yeah. couple interesting things. Definitely a lot of limestone, also very Jerusalem-like. But there was a line in there like, when we write our wishes on street poles, then anything is possible. And there's a thread of something I've been playing with for a couple days, which is something like the phrase, my wish for you is, because it's like, I can look at people and see what they want, and they can't. And it's like, it's tragic that they often don't realize what their dreams are, or they're like, they don't think it's possible. And they're like, my wish for you is, that you get that thing. And I think it scares people when I say that line, which is like, good. It should scare you. And it should also it should matter. And then, and so I was with that. And then the other thing that came up was the room. Just a handful of times in my life, there's been a room with filled with amazing people, and it's the oh, I want that room, and I want that room all the time. And I left that room the last time I had a room like that with this question of is it my job to drop everything and walk towards wherever I think that room is and spend my life searching the world for that room? Or is it my journey to make that room and to invite people into that room? And I still sit on the cusp of that question of that city is my city is that room, or that room is in every city, or that room is all of the convergence of the people in all the cities, which is the place where anything can happen, and the amazing people are in the room, and the creativity is available, and there's just spare time and space, and that's the room. And that's my divine city.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot for you to work with there too, but that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think what has made this, if in its small way, a successful experience for us is exactly not that I read something and it was cool, but that in the process of doing this, things came up for you that are, both of you, that are symbolic and powerful, and that can be explored and engaged. And that's the important thing. It's not it's not that, oh, I did a trance thing, or that hey, I read the preface of the preface book. Is that the combination of these elements reached both of you in some way and had something emerge that we didn't see coming. That's
you definitely triggered stuff, experiences that you couldn't possibly have known about.
Right. So that's, if I were to try to expand on this, especially if we were in the same place, but I would say, okay, maybe now let's have a moment where we go and we create something out of this, or and then we come back to it together, and then we can see if there are more commonalities emerging out of the experience that we had individually, and that
manifest
that. Yeah. So there are places you can take this, but so that's in a small way. This is an example of it. And right. From the standpoint of sort of what I set out in Turn Your Life into Art, this was nonfiction. Everything that I said was going to happen. There was no suspension of disbelief. There was no point that you had to get to. It wasn't okay, and then I need you to have this experience in particular. It was entirely open to what you were having. Ideally, instead of my just picking a thing and reading it, like I said, there would have been some way in which the two of you could have figured out what part of this book or other book I was going to read, which would have allowed you to make meaningful choices. Things like that. So there's some of the elements that
right. This was very improv. It wasn't set up in a whole way.
But it still maybe illustrates the point.
Yeah, it's interesting because the stuff you're saying it felt very new, but also it resonated with me, and that's real. I know what you're talking about, the city to city, and the I've been there.
Right.
Even though I
Right.
haven't been to most of the places you mentioned, but it's not a. Now I'm in the experience.
Yeah, no, that, and when I was writing that book and that preface, it really was, that was, my experience of, okay, diving into enough of these places, going there is this sort of common thing that seems to connect these different cities through, through these experiences that you have if you dive into urbanity enough. And yeah, that was very much the sort of experience that I had that led me to write that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like that's what we're trying to do on Psychotech, I think, is like build that city or some manifestation of it. I gotta be careful because after these experiences, I get a huge flood of
possibility.
inspiration, and I always have to like sort of regulate it so I don't just like go crazy.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess the problem with too much inspiration is they're all just distractions from each other. You'll never get anything done if you just sit in that, like the flood.
Yeah. Also, I can get very very personal revealing, and don't necessarily want to do that online.
Sure.
Mm.
There's a saying. There's a post Burning Man saying that is, after you've been to Burning Man, don't marry your parakeet.
Right. Or at least wait a month before you marry your parakeet.
Right,
I hope.
but yeah, take some. Don't make any sudden big life changes after you've had these transformative experiences.
Yeah.
Give them some time to settle in and see if you still want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but like still honoring the experience and honoring what's happening while still, waiting for, I guess, that connection to the real world or to the physical world to establish in a healthier long-term way.
Right.
All right, this might be a good